Good morning again, class. I'm grateful to be able to talk to you a little bit today about Buddhism and Christianity. Hopefully, you were able to see everything on Popley and everything is set up. That you guys all did great on the first quiz. Again, remember that first quiz, the quiz in class is closed book, and then the final will be open book. So, not asking you to remember everything from the whole entire course. There's so many details there, but for each entire week, I want you to really put some time into reading those. Reading the book again, it's a very simple book, right? But again, the hope is that this simple book will be able to help give you the foundation that you can hold for the rest of your ministry, right? The goal of education is not only knowledge, but that we could take that knowledge and then be able to use it in our lives, both in conversations for the gospel when it comes to those who maybe practice Baha'i or today Buddhism, but also to be able to teach and train others to kind of give them the basic groundwork of other world religions. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Buddhism. Buddhism is interesting because Buddhism has lots of different sects, and if you read the book, you realize that a lot of the different sects of Buddhism are very different, right? So if you walk into a Protestant church, both in Florida or in Miami, whether that's Lutheran or Methodist, what you'll see is something very similar. You can understand some of the symbols. You can understand the cross. You can understand the order of service, if you will. The challenge with Buddhism is that if you walk into different versions, you may not be able to tell which is which because they're so diverse. At its core, Buddhism has four main pillars, right? So this is the book, again, I'm trying Neighboring Faiths. This is the book that also written by Winfrey. That this is the larger book of the book that I ask you guys to read. And there's really four noble truths that Buddhism at its core follows. And again, remember that with Buddhism, sometimes it's hard and elusive to figure out which sect believes what because it's so diverse. I think part of the elements of Buddhism is more free-flowing, right? It's not rooted in facts, which we'll talk about here in a second. But the fourfold noble truths are to live is to suffer. Number one, this idea is not unique to Buddhism, right? So we know that in Christian life is the same thing, right? We know that live in this fallen world, we're going to face suffering. This is one of the reasons why Buddhism believes in reincarnation, that we want to suffer less in the next life. And they kind of believe in this endless cycle of reincarnation, kind of living a good life and maybe suffering less in the next, and the next, and ultimately reaching nirvana. So the fourfold noble truth number one is to live is to suffer. Number two, suffering is caused by attachments. So humans suffer because they allow themselves to get attached to this insubstantial world. We need to understand attachment here is grasping, craving, and not willing to let go. Simply wanting something to be the case is not attachment in that sense. The traditional translation of desire does not go far enough to express the thought that often is used synonymous with willingly. We certainly need to be willing to find enlightenment, but this is not the same thing as attaching ourselves to the goal or craving it. Okay, so number two, suffering is caused by attachment, which is number three, an individual can eliminate suffering by eliminating attachment. So if suffering is caused by being attached to this world, well then a freedom from suffering is loosing your attachment to this world. And the fourth path is this attachment is eliminated by the means of the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Noble Eightfold Path. And that Noble Eightfold Path was kind of like where this is all going to, is eight things that you need to live as. So the Eightfold Path is number one, the right view, understanding the truths of existence. Number two, the right intention, being willing to achieve enlightenment. Number three, the right speech, saying all that is and only what is required. And number four, the right action, doing all that is and only what is required. 5, the right livelihood, being a monk. Remember, the first Buddha didn't really try to start a religion. He tried to start a following. He asked people to become monks. And of course, after he died, there was many other expansions and variations of this religion. And number 6, the right effort, directing one's energy properly. 7, right mindfulness, meditating properly. And 8, the right concentration, meditating, maintaining continuous focus. Now, again, they provide this eightfold path, but there's really not a lot of direction on what those things are. What is the right path? What is the right thing to say, and what is not the right thing to say? Because it's very ambiguous and it's not always built on very clear teaching, sometimes it's very difficult to understand what they're referring to. Um, and again, as we think about Buddhism as we keep on going, there's lots of different versions and variations. They have 10 precepts, right? And those 10 precepts are different for monks versus lay people, right? Some are things only for monks, some things are for lay people. When we think of Buddhism, obviously one of the things we're trying to think about with Buddhism is we're trying to figure out how can we engage Buddhists for the cause of Christ. Now, this is going to be a little bit more challenging because Buddhism is more kind of like Baha'i. It's a little bit more ethereal. It's hard to kind of ground Buddhism in terms of what they believe because all the different sects of Buddhism believes in different things. And sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out where they actually believe. One of the greatest challenges when we're trying to explain the difference between Buddhism and Christianity, for example, is Christianity is rooted in facts. It's rooted in the historical fact that Jesus Christ lived, died, and rose again. And we say it's a historical fact is because those books, the Bible, are historical books that were written during the time when other books were written could refute what they said. So we believe, and that history has affirmed, that Jesus Christ literally lived and then literally died. And now they may not agree, everyone may not agree with the resurrection, but it's documented historical fact that there was a group of people, the early Christians, who believed that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Now, Buddhism doesn't believe in that. Buddhism doesn't believe in the historicity of things, so that's going to be harder for Christians to engage with Buddhism into having those kind of conversations. So when we think of how we can relate them. This is one thing that Winfrey said, which I think is good. And he says, the Christian gospel addresses different issues than Buddhism karma does. Instead of karma and recreation, it speaks of sin and redemption. Instead of various Buddhist deities, it focuses on the personal God who has revealed himself in history. This difference is not easy to communicate. However, the Christian message also provides a level of assurance for both this life and eternity. And Buddhism cannot provide such confidence. The focus shifts from denying the meaning of life to finding meaning in life with Jesus Christ. I think this is probably one of the easiest things to do is that when you're talking to someone who's dealing with Buddhism is you want to really ground the argument in reality and really talking about the assurance that one can find in life. How does Buddhism explain suffering? Well, they say, well, how do you escape suffering? Well, you remove attachments from this life. And as Christians, we would say, well, we can't remove suffering in this life because this life has fallen. We're explaining how this world has come under the curse of God's judgment because of sin, and that's why suffering exists. And the only way to get through suffering is to suffer, right, and to die in this life. But to die in Christ, therefore, we will experience a resurrection. So the only way to escape suffering is that, honestly, to escape this life in terms of the Christian faith, which is actually giving a lot more assurance and confidence. In the next video, I just want to do a quick version of synopsis of Christianity. For those who may not be familiar with it. So this is Buddhism, right? So Buddhism, again, they have the fourfold path, kind of going into the eightfold way of thinking. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, that there's so much variation when it comes to Buddhism, whether you have Pure Land Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, which is something that we probably think more of here in the West. So when you're talking to a Buddhist, it's important to understand, really is ask questions in terms of what they believe, because they need to tell you what they believe, because sometimes, depending on which sect they're in, things are going to vary slightly. Hopefully that's helpful, and you guys continue to do your discussions, and we'll continue to engage online. Thanks.